A very good evening to one and all. On behalf of the Sports Authority of Goa and the Indian Society of Sports and Exercise Medicine, I extend a very warm welcome to all the participants of today's program on biomechanics in sports. Sports biomechanics is a science that uses observation and analysis to give athletes, medical professionals, coaches, and performance specialists valuable information about body movements. These biomechanical analysis can help make changes in an athlete's training program and techniques, and it also helps reduce the risk of injuries. To guide us on today's program, we have with us Dr. Shikha Dondial from New Delhi. She's an MBBS and a gold medalist in MD Sports Medicine and now works as a senior resident doctor at VMMC and SHJ, New Delhi. On behalf of the Sports Authority of Goa, I welcome you, Dr. Shikha, for today's program. Thank you for making time out of your very busy schedule to be on this program today. This program would have not been possible without the support and guidance of the Executive Director of Sports Authority of Goa, Shri B.M. Prabhu Desai, and our Director of Coaching, Shri Bruno Coutinho. Once again, a very warm welcome to our resource person and a very warm welcome to our participants attending today's program also. Before I hand over to Dr. Shikha to take over, I'd just like to make a few announcements. At the end of the program, we would be providing you with the feedback form link. The feedback form link is compulsory. Your certificates will be issued to you based on your feedback form link, and attending the entire program is also compulsory. There will be a question answer session in the end of the program. So after the program, after Dr. Shikha finishes with her session, the participants can type their questions in the chat box. I now hand over the session to Dr. Shikha. Dr. Shikha, you can take over.
Thanks a lot. So can I start my screen sharing first?
Yeah, you can, Doctor. Doctor, you can start sharing your screen.
Yes, I'm doing it. My screen is visible now?
No, Doctor, you will have to share your screen again.
Actually, is it fine now?
Okay, now the screen's visible.
Okay.
Video is also off, so we are unable to see you also.
Okay. A very good afternoon, everybody. So Is it visible now?
Yeah, you're visible.
Okay. A very good afternoon, everybody. So today I'm here to present this talk on biomechanics in specific sports. My name is Dr. Shikha Nondial. I am currently working as a senior resident in the Department of Sports Medicine, Sports Injury Center, Safdarjung Hospital. Now let's talk about biomechanics at such first. What is a biomechanics? It is the application of a mechanical principles to biological problems, a mechanism, physical process which is responsible for a given action, reaction, or a result. Now, what exactly is the role of the biomechanics in sports? It is basically done to understand the performance in a sports, to examine the internal and the external forces which is acting on, and the body and their effects, to examine the sports equipment, the surfaces, etc., and most importantly, to understanding the cause of the specific injury related to the sports. Now,
Doctor, can I just interrupt you before you continue?
Yeah, sure.
Can you just turn it into slideshow?
Okay.
And is you're not and you're not visible also. We cannot see you. So I think your camera's off. Yeah, okay. Okay, you can continue with your presentation.
Okay. So the role of the biomechanics in sports, basically we just have to know the kind of the sports the athletes are into. We actually have to know about the athlete and the kind of the environment the athletes are playing, getting a training and going for the tournament or so. Now, talking about the spectrum of a sports biomechanics, I would like to depict the more clearer picture in the diagram. The spectrum of the sports biomechanics will involve a static spectrum and a dynamic spectrum. Now, when we talk about the biomechanics in sports, we are basically more concerned about the spectrum, which is more dynamic. So basically, it has got three components: the kinematics, the kinetics, and the electromyography. The kinematics is the thing which is basically deals with the position, the velocity, and the acceleration of an athlete. While talking about the kinetics, it deals basically with the force and the torque related to the particular sports, and the electromyography, which is basically has been done to understand the kind of the muscle contractions, and it is basically a study to undergo for that. So basically, it is just done to see how much amount of the recruitment of the muscle is out there, the timing of their muscles, the firing rate about that muscle. Now, talking about the effect of the kinematics in sports, it has basically been done to better understand the human movement during a particular form of a sports, optimal body positions and the actions for the efficient and the effective motion, and to reach the desired outcome of individual sports injury prevention. Now, talking about the kinematic analysis, we can do an analysis by visually seeing the athlete. The most commonly we can do also just to see the flexibility, how much amount of the flexibility is being there in a muscle or a tendon, and we can just go through that with the goniometer help. We can also see the picture of an athlete, and also a video analysis can be done. Now this is a picture that has been shown where actually the gait analysis of a particular person has been done, where he's been actually been standing on a force platform, and there are 6 different cameras that has been applied from different angles. So what we can see in this state is how much amount of the biomechanics specifically related to particular muscle that has been involved. We'll discuss it in the later slides. Now, the kinematic analysis in the sports has been actually been done to see what is the nature of the activities, where exactly the high resolution camera has been required, and the measurements during the competition interference caused by the sunlight. Now, the kinetics. Kinetics is the measurement of the force and the torque that cause or against the motion. As you can see in the picture, at any particular object, there is always a force of gravity and a center of gravity. The center of gravity is basically the total mass of the body that has been situated on that. So whenever any force that has been applied, any external force that has been applied on an object, it always causes it to create a motion. And that motion with respect to that force is basically called as a torque. So basically, kinetic deals with the force and the torque related to a particular object. Now, what information does it provide? It is basically how the movement is being produced and how a position that has been maintained, which is very important factor when we are dealing with a particular form of a sports. Now, very important, the most important thing when we talk about the biomechanics is the ground reaction force. Now, I think everybody must be aware about the Newton's third law, which basically says that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Similar comes with the ground reaction force, which is basically the force exerted by the ground on a body in contact with it. When a person is just standing, the ground reaction force corresponds with the person's weight. And when the body is moving, the ground reaction force increases due to the acceleration forces. So as we can see in the picture, that the ground reaction force to a person that has been applied, and that basically, if the force has been applied from the outside, it creates a moment arm. And that moment arm that has been created because of that externally applied force is that what we call as a torque. So the whole biomechanics of a particular person or an athlete or a sports basically depending upon the how much amount of the ground reaction force it has been applying, where exactly the body center of mass is located, how much amount of the force has been applied from the outside, and how much amount of the moment has been created. If you will be able to balance it, then the whole biomechanics can be sorted and the majority of the injuries can be prevented. Now, ground reaction force during landing from a jump. Now, there are manipulations that can be done to minimize the ground reaction forces technique. So there were the scientists whose name were Valiant and Cavendish. Then in 1985, they have actually studied the pattern of football and the magnitude of the peak forces in the year of 1985 in 10 basketball players. And they have come to the conclusion that the peak force, they were more concerned about the peak force that has been generated. So they have said that whenever an athlete or a runner has been doing a running, or whenever you're just going for a run, athlete or a walk, so peak force from the toe heel landing was 4.1 of the body weight as compared to the flat foot landing, which was 6% of the body weight. So as you can see in the picture itself, supposedly, if you are trying to strike your foot and the first strike that comes into the play is the heel. So what happens in that case, as you can see in the red arrows, is the shoes protect the feet and the promote running with the heel striking in the ground. And this transmits the shock wave of the impact to the knees, hips, and the lower back. So there might be an equal transmission to the entire joint. But when we talk about the impact, when it is being given in the flat foot, it is going only towards the soleus muscles. So that is going to compromise more of the joint because it is not equally and evenly distributed among the joints. So how you are just striking your feet on the ground, that is also got a very important role. Now, practical application of the biomechanics, there is one such thing which is known as the Fosbury flaps. In the 1968 Summer Olympic Games, Dick Fosbury introduced a new technique for the high jump and broke the world record. Before this technique, high jumpers used a body roll technique. So as you can see in the picture, in the 1896, the technique that was being using during the high jump was known as scissors. In 1912, the rolls comes into play, and that is known as a Western roll. And then comes the 1968, where basically James Dick Fosbury has introduced a new technique, which is known as the Fosbury flap. After 1968 Olympic Games, most high jumpers changed to the Fosbury flop techniques and improved their jumps. Every record holder since the 1968 Games has used the Fosbury flop technique. Now, how we can minimize, maximize, or optimize the effort? Talking about maximizing effort. Supposedly, for a standing vertical jump, it is necessary to use a maximum amount of muscle effort to generate the vertical forces on the ground. Obviously, that is going to give the more amount of the propulsion. And the result is athlete overcomes their body weight and generates the movement upwards. So basically, the maximum amount of the muscle effort that you are providing before starting a jump, it is just going to dissipate your body weight and it will generate the more amount of the movement upwards. The faster a person's body is traveling upward at the start, the higher the body will travel upward. As you can see in the picture, that he is just trying to produce a counter movement. And when there is a positive active work towards upward, that is what we know as a push-off phase. There is less time requires to push it forward. more amount of the muscle contraction, the lesser effort that would be required. Now, this is about the maximum effort. Let's talk about the minimum effort in that case. Same person, when the body falls back to the ground, the athlete needs to minimize the force applied to the body during the landing. And this minimized landing forces results in much less trauma to the muscular system. So maximizing and the minimizing effort in the same game is very important thing. There is also one such thing which is known as the optimized effort. So optimized effort enables a better, smoother coordination of a complicated movements. Now, talking about the clinical biomechanics, one must be very much aware about the plane and the axis, because every movement is taking in a particular plane and in the particular axis. So based on that, there are three different planes in the body. The one is sagittal plane, another is a transverse plane, and the third one is a coronal plane, as you can clearly see in the picture. And there is the axis that has been transferred, which is the longitudinal axis going from head to toe. There is an anterior-posterior axis, as the name suggests, and there is a left to right, or the horizontal, or we can also say as a frontal axis. So these are the axes and the planes where every body and the joint movement will be taking place. Now, talking about the lower limb assessment, one must be very much clear and crisp aware about the joint movements, the hip joint, the knee joint, and the ankle joint. So talking about the hip joint, there are the range of motions, the movements that has been occurring in a hip joint is flexion and extension, abduction and adduction, and the external rotation and the internal rotation. Similarly, in the case of knee joints, there is a flexion, extension, internal rotation, and the external rotation. Now, there is a deformity that has been depicted in the picture here for the knee is that valgus and the varus. It is talking about the knee. When they are going towards the midlines, it becomes a valgus knee. When they are going away from the midline, they become the varus knee. And similarly, in the case of the ankle joint, there is plantar flexion, and there is a dorsiflexion, pronation, and supination, and inversion and eversion. The most important assessment while doing for a biomechanical assessment for the lower limb is just to simply see the single leg squat test of a concerned person. And one must be able to look for whether there is any dropping in the levels of the shoulder, trunk is vertical or not, there is any dropping in the pelvis, any lateral twisting in the pelvis or not, any valgus, any outward or inward movement in the knee or not, and whether the foot is in the neutral rotation. They are not plantigrating or not. So in the first picture, as you can see, the single leg squat is crisp. There is not having any abnormality. And on the second picture, as you can see, the pelvis, first talking about the shoulder is drooping towards the side. The trunk is not straight. It's lying away from the midline. As you can see in the pelvis, that the pelvis is drooping first, and also there is a lateral swaying in the pelvis. And talking about the knee, there is a valgus movement that you can see in the knee. So whenever a person comes to the for the assessment of your biomechanics, the most easiest way to see for the lower limb biomechanical assessment is the single leg squat test, and one must be very easily differentiated from a normal person, that whether there is a drooping in the shoulder, drooping in the pelvis, whether there is a knee which is going away from the midline, either it is going towards the midline or not. It's a very simple way to look for the biomechanical assessment for the lower limb. Another thing that one can see is a single leg heel raise. So what actually is single leg heel raise is, you have to look for the signs of tibialis posterior weakness, which is very much common in the player that is involved in the lower limb sports. And that tibialis posterior weakness is one reason the majority of the people present with a flat foot, and they are not very much aware of it. So that is the one way to see whether you are having a flat foot or not. So there is inability to rise through the medial arch or failure of the heel to inwards. So this is the basic or the simple test to see for the assessment is a single leg heel raise. Now let's talk about the football injuries. The pelvis contains the center of the gravity of the body, and it acts as a fulcrum for all the athletic movements in the football. The reactive forces also act through anterior pelvis, which is symphysis pubis, inguinofemoral aponeurosis, and parasymphysis muscle. The symphysis pubis and the rami, they function as an effective strut which is modulating the reactive forces between the lower limbs and the axial skeleton. Now, studies have shown that preseason weakness of hip abductors and external rotators, it predisposes to the lower limb injury, and they decrease the adductor function, which is predisposes to the further ipsilateral adductor injuries. That is the reason most of the football players presents with the adductor strain. So the groin injury has been described more frequently in football players and is a significant problem estimated to constitute 10% of acute and 18% of chronic football-related injuries. So this is a diagram which basically depicts the groin disruption and the main core reason which is basically responsible for the arthritic pubalgia and the role of the lower limb biomechanics in that. First thing is the pelvic asymmetry, and the important thing that has been related to it, it is a core stability. Second thing is the leg length inequality, because functional leg length discrepancy is very important factor when dealing with the adductor sprain. Footwear, the kind of the footwear that you're wearing, whether they are rigid, whether they are flexible, whether they are semi-rigid or semi-flexible, the kind of surface that one is actually getting the training into. Age, because age is an important factor, whether the person is a skeletally mature person or a skeletally immature person. And then comes the malicious. Some misalignment syndrome, supposedly the valgus knee is present, foot is already, a hereditary pronation is present, so much of the external rotation is present in the foot. So these are mainly the cofactors which is basically responsible for causing the adductor injuries in a football player. Now, biomechanics of a knee injury. When talking about the knee injury, there are two of the most common sports-related injuries are patellofemoral pain syndrome. The patient most commonly presents with the anterior knee pain and the ACL injuries. Now, three main risk factors that contribute to an increased risk of knee injury in football are age of the player, a previous injury that has already been present, and the ligamentous status of the knee. Now, one most important thing that is I would like to mention here is, then while training, females are more commonly injured when talking about the ACL injury. But during competitions, the studies have shown that the males are more commonly injured as compared to the females. But otherwise, females already have a more propensity to rupture their ACL because of their small knee, small intercondylar notch, and they have got a more propensity for the ACL injury to happen. Now, the playing environment has also got a very important role with a higher number of injuries in indoor football, of which the majority are non-contact. Now, this diagram is basically showing the risk factors for the knee to get injured for the ACL. Whenever any kind of the dynamic sport, supposedly we are talking about football. So femoral adduction, that means femur is more closely towards the midline. There is a dynamic valgus, that means the knee is away from the midline, and that what is known as knee abduction. And ankle is more towards everted. So these are the triple factors, which is basically a very important risk factor for ACL injury to happen. Now, the ACL injury. So the first picture actually sets, this is the position of the safety, where there is a very, very, very less likely chances of any ACL injury to happen. So talking about the back, we have got the normal lordosis, hips, that is extensors, abductors, and the glutes of the hips. They are flexed. There is no abduction, no adduction. The hips, they are in neutral rotation. There is no further movements. Knee, talking about the flexors and most importantly, the hamstrings. Knee in a semi-flexed state of 20 to 30 degrees. The tibial rotation or the plantar flexors, they are neutral. There is no rotation on tibia. And landing pattern, most importantly, concerned muscle is gastrocnemius and tibialis posterior. They both feet in a controlled balance. Now comes the point of no return, where there is a chances and the highly likelihood of chances to get the ACL injured. There is an adduction and the internal rotation at the level of hips. There is less flexion and the valgus at the regional of knee. There is internal or maybe the external rotation at the level of tibia. And then one foot is out of control and it becomes unbalanced. And that point is known as point of no return. And whenever a patient or an athlete is giving the history of the ACL injury, they always said there might be a non-contact twisting injury where the knee is going outward or maybe the inward, the hips are maybe abducted or adducted, and that's how they just get out of control and they rupture their ligament. Now let's talk about the lower back pain in the particular sports. Well, every sports has got the lower back pain, but we had just came to the conclusion that the many of the researchers have came to the conclusion that in the cyclist, they have got the most common symptoms to be associated with the cyclist in the lower back pain. So basically, what actually happened in the cyclist is that they try to decrease the back pain by causing more flexion of their spine, and that's how it's going to worsen the spinal biomechanics. So spinal position in cycling, ideally it should be forward bend and should be achieved evenly. But the cyclist with the lower back pain in the second picture, they tend to adopt a more flexed lumbar spine and with less anterior pelvic tilt and more extended thoracic spine. And that is just going to aggravate the symptoms. The best way to decrease it is by just doing more of the anterior pelvic tilt and by decreasing less flexion for the lumbar spine, so that more mobility to the entire spine can be adjusted. The second more common symptoms that a cyclist will present with is a knee pain, which is also a patellofemoral pain syndrome, and we also call it as an anterior knee pain. Now, the first important factor for a knee pain to happen is the saddle height. So one must have, the researchers have said that the maximum knee extension is basically the key for the bike fitting parameter, which typically ranges from 35 to 40 degrees among the professional riders. Now, patellofemoral joint contact pressure is basically inversely proportional to the saddle height. That means more amount of the saddle height, decrease amount of the patellofemoral joint contact pressure. And decreased pressure means decreased amounts of the anterior knee pain symptoms. So one must, every cyclist must be aware of the fact that the saddle height is an important factor, and more amount of the height will have less amount of the pressure on the joint. Now, the second important thing is the medial knee motion. So that medial knee motion is basically happening because there is an angle that actually been created between the pedal and the shoe. And that angle which basically leads to the more amount of the torsion toward the medial aspects, and that which leads to the medial knee motion. Now, the best way to decrease is these days is with the use of, rather than using the rigid pedal, there is a use of more amount of the freely movable saddle, and the cushions can also be used in this case. Now let's talk about the ankle sprain. Any form of the contact or a non-contact stroke, ankle sprain is most common. And when talking about the ankle sprain, the lateral ankle sprain are the most common to be injured, which is also known as the anterior talofibular ligament, or we call it as the ATFL sprain. Now the mechanism of injury, whenever a patient or an athlete comes with an ankle sprain, we must need to know how that injury actually had happened, whether the foot had actually turned towards the inside or the outside. So be aware of the mechanism or the characteristics for the lateral ankle sprain and the syndesmotic sprain. Now, why it is important? Because to guide the assessment of the appropriate tissue. Now, assessment of the ligaments are important because there are so many ligaments that has been present around an ankle. The most common to injured is the anterior talofibular ligament. The second common to be injured is the CFL, and the anterior talofibular ligament along with the calcaneofibular ligament. They basically, both of them form the part of the lateral ligament complex. So there are certain tests that we need to do to examine them. For the ATFL, we basically do the anterior draw test. We can also palpate on the lateral aspect of the foot as well, and the manual stress testing can be. Now in the ATFL tear, there is more amount of the pain presents towards the plantar flexion and the inversion. While talking about the CFL, you can also do a manual stress testing, and palpation is a thumb key to palpate for any ligament and the tendon injuries. Now talking about the syndesmosis as a part, palpation followed by the specific squeeze test for the same can be done to assess the particular ligament that has been involved. Now, history taking previous to giving any modality to the concerned person is very important, because we need to find out what was actually the risk factor for the injury, whether it is a recurrent injury or it is a fresh injury. It also may indicate that there are some unresolved mechanical or sensory motor impairments also being present. Now, assessment of the bone and the weight-bearing status can be best done via an X-ray examination. So any kind of the injury, whether twisting or the contact or a non-contact, can happen, and you need to rule out whether the bony injury had happened or not. Always go for the routine digital X-rays to find out the same. Establish the likelihood of the ankle fractures, and then via the use of the Ottawa ankle. So Ottawa ankle rule simply means there is a gap of 6 millimeter that has been present between the tibia and the medial malleolus. If that gap had gone, that means the ankle, the Ottawa ankle root has got disrupted, and there is a definitive injury to the joint that can happen. Now, I personally go for the foot posture index when I'm going to deal with any ankle injury. So, what basically is a foot posture index is that it's basically a performer, or one needs to fill whenever they want to see a patient, when they are seeing a patient for the ankle or a foot injury, and one needs to see for the scoring system in the each and every follow-up. Now, there are basically various parameters that has been involved for the foot posture index, as such as, first thing is talar head palpation. So we'll need to palpate the talar head, and one needs to see whether talar head is equally palpable on both the sides, where it is more palpable on the lateral side, that is towards the thumb, or it is more lateral side, that is towards the little toe, and the medial sides towards the greater toe. So based on that, the talar head palpation can be done, whether it is equally palpable on both sides, whether it is palpable more on the outer side or less on the inner side, more on the inner side or less on the outer side. Based on that, it has been given the scoring system ranges from -2 to +2. Now, the second important thing is supra and infralateral malleolar curvature. You simply have to tell the patient to stand like this, and you just have to see how much, you just need to palpate for the medial malleolus and to see how much amount of the curvature has been present, whether the curvature is concave, whether it is flat, and whether it is convex. Similarly, the calcaneal eversion and inversion can also be seen, whether it is making an angle of more than 5 degrees, less than 5 degrees, or 0 to 5 degrees. The fourth important factor is the prominence of the talonavicular joint. Talonavicular joint palpation is the fourth important step to see for the foot posture index. Congruence of the internal longitudinal arch or the medial longitudinal arch is very important. It is also a very important step to see whether the patient is having a flat foot or not, or a tibialis posterior dysfunction is present or not, because tibialis posterior is a major tendon, which is basically responsible for the formation of the medial arch. And the last sign is the abduction or adduction of the forefoot with respect to the rear foot. This sign can also be called as too many toes sign. When the patient is standing and you can just assess the toes more towards the outer sides, then you can see that the patient is having the sign which is known as too many toes sign. And the another system that I used for the ankle injuries is the foot, ankle, and the disability index. So this is a scoring system where actually it is a subjective score where the patient has to fill it by himself, that on what activities he is having pain and how much amount of the pain is being present, how much amount of the difficulty. So based on that, you just have to take whether he is unable to do so, he is able to do it with the extreme difficulty or a moderate difficulty, slight difficulty, or no difficulty. So these are basically parameters, whether he is having problem in standing, walking on even ground, on the ground without shoes, on uneven ground, going up and down, and they're doing any heavy work, walking up hills, down hills, going stairs up and going stairs down, problem in squatting, coming up to your toes, walking 5 minutes or less, 15 minutes or greater. So in every each and follow-up in 4 to 6 weeks, you just see the FADI scoring system for the patient with the ankle sprain. So see how much amount of the progress that is being done. Now comes to the upper limb. When talking about the upper limb, they are basically risk factors for the shoulder pain or injury that can be identified on the physical examination. The risk factors could be a poor posture, and the intervention required for the same is core strengthening of multifidus and transverse abdominis muscle, stretching of the iliopsoas, and improving the thoracic mobility. Second important risk factor is asymmetric muscular development. We can just go for the intervention like stretching the pectoralis and the latissimus dorsi and strengthening of the lower trapezius and the rhomboides. Majority of the muscular development happen because there is always a discrepancy between the lower trapezius and the upper trapezius, where there is upper trapezius becomes activated and lower trapezius becomes less activated. That would lead to the biomechanical abnormality. Now, talking about the third important risk factor is the posterior impingement. The posterior impingement is because the posterior capsule becomes fibrotic. And that posterior capsule fibrotic will basically cause the displacement of the humeral head, and which basically eventually leads to the compromise of the rotatory cuff. So the important thing is here, the give stretching of the posterior capsule, and we can also call it as a sleeper stretch program. A 6-week of the sleeper stretch program to stretch the posterior capsule has been given for the same. An important step is a periscapular strength. Now, the fourth important step is scapular dyskinesia, a very important risk factor, which eventually everybody will, in the OPD setup, the patient presents with the shoulder pain, we always just never keep in mind to keep a check on the scapula as well. So the strengthening of the serratus and the lower trapezius, rhomboids is important. And as I have already said, the upper trapezius become activated. So you have to stretch the levator scapulae, pectoralis minor, along with the upper trapezius, improve the thoracic mobility, and always important to address a poor posture. A poor balancing on the single leg squat. We had already discussed a single leg squat test. And if there is any drooping in the shoulder, in the pelvis, any lateral swing, any valgus movement in the knee, so you have to strengthen the core. And by core, it means gluteal and abdominal oblique muscles. Dynamic proprioceptive exercises that can also be added on to that stage. Decrease in the shoulder external rotation and 90-degree abduction simply means there is a cross internal rotation deficit also being present. Eccentric periscapular strengthening and progress to the thrower strength program. Supraspinatus weakness, you have to strengthen it, but also look for the other etiologies. Let's talk about the bowling as such. And by bowling, I mean I would like to give a little bit of the light on the fast bowling technique. So as you can see in the picture, there is a back foot technique and there is a front foot technique. So whenever we talk about the fast bowling, there are three basically important factors, component that has been involved. There are three components are the run-up phase, the delivery stride, and the follow-through phase. So in the run-up phase, it basically allows the bowler to gain up the momentum required to deliver the ball at the desired speed and present the body's position for the next phase, that is for the delivery stride. And the delivery stride is the last contact of the back foot, then transition to the front foot contact and end with the ball release. So as you can see in the picture, the first picture will say there is a back foot contact and the second picture will say it is a front foot contact. So there is a transition of the back foot contact to the front foot contact in the phase of the delivery stride. And it basically ends with the ball release and the follow through. When talking about the fast bowling techniques, there are basically four important techniques that has been involved in the fast bowling. The first is a front-on technique. The first picture is a front-on technique, which basically involves alignment of the pelvis and the shoulder parallel to the batsman at the back foot contact. The second is a side-on technique, which involves the alignment of the bowler shoulders and the alignment somewhere between of the bowler shoulders and the pelvis, which is perpendicular to the batsman at the back foot contact. Now, talking about the semi-open techniques, which is defined as both shoulder and the pelvis alignment somewhere between front and the side-on positions at the back foot contact. And lastly, it is a mixed technique, which involves the dissociation between the shoulder and the pelvis alignment at the back foot contact, which is known as the shoulder pelvis separation angle. For example, a front-on pelvis alignment and a side-on shoulder alignment at the back foot contact, or side-on pelvis position or front or shoulder position at the back foot contact. So out of all the techniques, it has been shown in the literature that the mixed technique has got the maximum number of the lumbar spine injuries and the maximum shoulder counter rotation during delivery stride of more than 30 degrees as shown in the picture. It's actually responsible for the higher increase in the bone stress injuries to the lumbar spine. So the shoulder counter rotation is an important factor for causing the bone stress injuries to the lumbar spine. And that is the reason the mixed technique has got the maximum number of the lumbar spine injuries. Now let's talk about swimming. There are basically 4 kinds of the strokes that has been used in the swimming is. And the most common one and the most common the swimmer also use while going for the training is a freestyle one. The other ones are the butterfly, the backstroke, and the breaststroke. When talking about the biomechanics in terms of swimming or inside the water, it becomes a little different from as compared to the ground surface, because here the center of gravity has been replaced by the center of volume. And there is another force that has been actually happened, which is in opposite to the body weight, is a buoyant force. So in the second picture, as you can see, there is an equal and the opposite buoyant force that has been applied as per according to the body weight. There is a thrust force that the body is applying to overcome the drag force that the water is applying towards the body. So in the water, the entire biomechanics becomes little different as compared to the ground surface. Now, when talking about the freestyle stroke, basically it is the most common one to be used for the training purpose as well. So freestyle stroke, there are phases of the freestyle swimming, as you can see in the picture. In the first picture, the first one is where the hand enter first. The second one, when it is trying to reach and glide to give a body a propulsive movement to come forward. Then comes the pull through, where he is just trying to pull through that all the drag forces so that the acceleration can be given to the body. And lastly is the recovery, where he's just trying to recover and put off the body. Now, the second picture determines the role of center of buoyancy and the gravity in determining how a swimmer floats. So basically, the buoyant force acting through the center of buoyancy and the gravitational force acting through the center of the gravity. Now, this is the state of floating equilibrium, where the buoyant and the gravitational forces are aligned. And that distance between the center of buoyancy and the gravity will determine the angle at which the swimmer floats. Now, let's talk about the shoulder pain in the swim. So whenever a swimmer comes with a shoulder pain, always have to ask in the history that whether there is any abrupt increase in the training volume or intensity or not, whether he is actually performing a unilateral breathing pattern or not. He is able to cross the midline with the hand through pull through. Any history of previous injury, any recent change in coach is important factor, because that is ultimately going to change in the training volume and the intensity. Any use of the hand paddles is being there or not. And there is a drag increasing the training devices, that is drag suits and the bag that has been applied in the recent training program. One such notion that we commonly heard from the swimmers is the swimmer shoulder. A swimmer shoulder is nothing but a rotator cuff tendinopathy itself, which is basically a preceding factor predisposing after an impingement that basically had happened. And that's the most common rotator cuff tendon that has been involved in a swimmer is a supraspinatus tendon. So basically it happened because of the hypomobility of the cervicothoracic junction. As we all know that the whole body is a kinetic chain and every joint has been interconnected to the other. So because of the cervicothoracic junction hypomobility, there is a supraspinatus tendinopathy that can happen. Loss of internal rotation. So as you can see in the picture, the patient is abducted with the internal rotation test. The elbows should be kept in the 90-degree flexion and the upper arm should be prevented from moving forward as the shoulders are elevated. Swimmers should aim for 150 to 70 degrees of that. So if there is a sudden, as we have already discussed, there is a sudden increase in the intensity due to overload, that is just use of the hand paddles and the drag suits. These are all those factors which is can predispose the swimmer to a supraspinatus tendinopathy, or also known as a swimmer shoulder. Now let's talk about tennis. So if the player is belonging to a tennis, then the most common complaint then he always comes up with a lateral elbow pain. So lateral elbow pain, the most important predisposing factor for the same is if he is a young beginner, because of the skeletal immaturity, there is a more propensity to get injured. If there is a overuse and there is a poor stroke biomechanics. By poor stroke biomechanics, the most important thing is when they are hitting it with a backhand with a flexed wrist, is because that will lead to basically the eccentric contraction and lesser strengthening at the impact. So it is seen in the clearly picture that the first picture is one hand backhand technique, an extended wrist and impact reduces stress at the lateral epicondyle. But when we flex the wrist, it basically increases the stress at the lateral epicondyle and predisposes to the elbow pain. Now let's talk about the throwing shoulder. Now the throwing shoulder is basically an internal impingement, also known as intra-articular impingement, where it's actually the abduction and external rotation. We also call as 90-90 position. The undersurface of the posterior superior rotator cuff contacts the posterior superior glenoid labrum and may become pinched between labral and greater tuberosity. So there is a pinching of the rotator cuff tendon between the labrum and the greater tuberosity. There is an increase in the external rotation due to repetitive microtrauma to the anterior capsule produced in the cocking phase of a throwing, and there is a symptomatic anterior instability and present as a dead arm syndrome. Now, this acquired internal rotation loss, which is also known as GIRD or gross internal rotation deficit, caused by a posterior-inferior capsular contracture, is essential that secondarily results in increase in the external rotation. A scapular malposition that also can lead to a thick scapula, which basically means scapular malposition, inferior medial border prominence, coracoid pain and malposition, and dyskinesis of the scapular movement. A thrower with this syndrome presents with an apparent drop scapula in his dominant symptomatic shoulder compared with the contralateral shoulder scapula. Now, when talking about the thick scapula, as seen in the picture, there are of three types. Type 1, when there is an increase of the inframedial border prominence in the picture A. Type 2, when the entire medial border prominence that can happen, it becomes type 2. And type 3, where there is a superomedial prominence that can be present. Now, this is basically a question, a form that I've been using in the follow-up for the scapular dyskinesia patient, where one would like to mention the sports, the position they are playing into, and the presenting symptoms that they are having. So, subjective and objective assessment of the particular person that can be done by palpation. So, to look for the tenderness spots at the region of the bony tenderness at the coracoid, at the AC joint, in the region of periscapula, proximal lateral arm due to the deltoid overactivation leads to the pain, and any radicular symptom is present or not. Based on the symptomatic presence of the symptoms, we can give the score of 1, and if there is absence, we can give a score of 0. Similarly, the objective assessment for the same can be done. Now, in the objective assessment, we can also go for some impingement test, which we call as a knee test, Hawkins-Kennedy's test, and abduction, and simply by doing the abduction and external rotation to see whether the patient is complaining of any pain on that region or not. And then comes the scapular resistance test. Now, the fourth important factor is the scapular malposition, where basically we'll need to see that how much amount of the scapula is deviating from the midline. As you can see in the picture, in the first picture, that how much amount of the scapula is deviating from the midline, how much amount of the difference is between the both of the inferior border prominence, and then comes the lateral protraction. Now, when we talk about throwing, there are certain phases of the throwing. So let's get into the phases of the throwing first. The first phase is the wind-up phase, where basically there is a transfer of weight to the back leg, which is phase 1. Phase 2 is when the back leg will initiate a forward motion, and there is a shoulder and shoulder blade prepare for the throw. And the third is torso uncoils and rotates to the target. Now, when arms comes into a cocking phase, the lead leg provides the stable base, and the lumbar spine hyperextends and rotates. The shoulder fully rotates with the appropriate shoulder blade position. Now comes the arm acceleration phase, where basically the trunk moves from extension to flexion. Earlier, in the cocking phase, it was in extension, and now trunk is moving from extension to flexion. Opposite side obliques and paraspinals increases the trunk and the pelvic rotation. And that is how the roles of latissimus dorsi, pectoralis major, and subscapularis reaches the maximum activity. So there is a more propensity for them to get rupture or to get injured at that stage. And elbows grow from flexed to extended state. Now comes the deceleration phase, where stride leg absorbs some of the forces, scapular muscle contract to stabilize and control the movement, and greatest amount of force at the shoulder happen at the deceleration phase. Elbow flexors eccentrically contract, so there is more chances of the shoulder to get injured at the deceleration phase, as well as the elbow as well, because there is an eccentric contraction, and always whenever there is an eccentric contraction, there is a chances of the injury can happen at that stage. And lastly comes the follow-through phase, where trunk decelerates, stride leg provides stability and absorb forces, and eccentric contraction of the shoulder blade and the trunk to control. Now, when talking about the shoulder injuries, in the wind-up phase, there are no injuries as common. And in the cocking phase, the injuries that can happen is the anterior subluxation, internal impingement, glenoid labrum lesion, and subacromial impingement. In the acceleration phase, You can see there is a propensity to get shoulder instability, labral tears, overuse injury to the tendons, and the tendon ruptures can also happen. In the deceleration phase, labral tears can happen at the attachment of the long head of biceps. Subluxation of the long head of the biceps can also happen. Lesions of the rotator cuff. And lastly, the follow-through phase, there is tear of the superior aspect of the glenoid labrum at the origin of the biceps tendon and subacromial impingement. Lastly, the elbow injuries. Excessive valgus strain at the elbow during the late cocking phase for the throwing can lead to medial elbow injuries such as muscle tear, avulsion fractures, ulnar nerve damage, and most commonly, ulnar collateral ligament strain or tear. In addition to the valgus strain injuries, also follow due to lateral compartment at the elbow, such as avascular necrosis, osteochondritis dissecans, osteochondral chip fractures, or any combination of this injury. During the acceleration phase, secondary to the excessive elbow extension, peak velocity, olecranon can impinge against the medial aspect or the trochlear groove and fossa, which may form the posteromedial osteophytes and loose body formation, leading to valgus extension overload syndrome. Now, the take-home message for this is biomechanics involves a complex analysis of technique through the latest technology. So correcting such errors not only improve game, but also happens to prevent the injury. As a coach, it's a duty to correct such faulty techniques, and seeking a help from a biomechanic expert, from a sports medicine physician can lead to better treatment and prevention of the injuries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shikha. That was a very scientific and wonderful session. So we'll just take a few question and answers. I'd like to begin with the first question. There are a number of coaches that we have, who encourage their method, in techniques or in running. Suppose example for a runner, a running style. A coach would suggest a particular method. So if that method is working out for an athlete, he's improving or it's suiting his body, is biomechanic analysis still important? If, an old traditional technique or method is suiting you, is analysis important in that case?
See, biomechanical analysis is not only is important to assess for the injuries. It's when we talk about the performance as such. Supposedly, a coach is giving a certain technique, a traditional form of technique, which is not hampering an athlete. But when we talk about giving the best performance, so I don't think there is any harm to go for the analysis as such. And we can just go to see whether there is any increase in the performance after just, go for the analysis after that, post that or not. So I don't think that it is just only been done to assess for the injuries. We can do it for the performance enhancement as well. So the baseline biomechanical analysis to do for the sake it's not a harmful idea.
Okay, Nilesh, would you like to take the second question?
Yeah, doctor, this is a question for you. Is there any particular protocol for rectification of illegal bowling action by the bowler that is called a chucking in cricket?
Doctor, before you answer this question, I'd just like to ask you to just stop screen sharing.
Okay.
If you can just stop screen sharing, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Can you please repeat the question?
Is there any particular protocol for rectification of illegal bowling action? It's called a checking in cricket.
I am not very much aware of any such protocol for the same. I don't think there is any protocol to rectify it as well. So I would definitely like to know about it, but I am pretty much not very much aware of the same.
Okay, I'll take the next question. Are there any biomechanical softwares for coaches? I mean, in methods of testing, are there any softwares or any applications that coaches can use while training athletes?
You don't need a certificate as well. There are various kinds of the questionnaires that has been available. And, sometimes it's not the software that you require. I have already mentioned that by use of the goniometer, which is a very small instrument, And you can, you're just able to find out the small biomechanical errors through the goniometer itself. So you just don't need to have the requirement of the software as such. They're simply plain questionnaires that is being available. They're very small and simple instruments that is just being available, and coaches can have a handy of them all the time. And it's very essential to just go with all the athletes in a particular period of time. So I don't think anybody would need to require for software as such when everything comes handy.
Nilesh, you'll take the next question.
Yeah. We do static stretching. So this is this increases or decreases the performance of sports person?
See, there are various consensus regarding the same. That sometimes it's said, but personally, I don't consider static stretching is a very good protocol if somebody would like to follow it for a warm-up or a cool-down. Because sometimes the static stretching is basically simulating as an eccentric stretch. So it is going to cause more injury to the athlete. To my personal opinion, if athlete is going for a workout session, or if they had just completed the workout session, best way to release the muscle is just doing the icing or a foam rolling. Static stretching as such is not a very good idea, because stretching itself is a protocol for the tendon loading. And when we talk about tendon loading, we always have to go for the isometric testing, then followed to the stretching. This is a basic protocol. When we talk about the tendon and we are just giving, directly giving stretching to a particular tendon without actually following the protocol for the tendon, I am not very much in favor of static stretching as such.
Thank you. Debbie.
Okay, I'll take the next question. Can biomechanics, or is biomechanics used in designing of sports equipment or clothing used for sports, rackets maybe for that instance, or bats? Can you just guide us on how biomechanics would help in any kind of that aspect?
As I have already mentioned in one of my slides related to the cycling as well. So it is because of the biomechanics only. See, earlier what actually had happened in the cycling, I would like to give an example for the cycling as well. When they have started using the pedals, they had incorporated the rigid pedals in the same. And what actually been happening on the rigid pedals is that there was certain form of the angle that was forming between the shoes and the rigid pedaling, and which is basically compromising your knee. So based on that, the biomechanical assessment of the various cyclists that has been done, and they came to the conclusion that it is better to incorporate a cushion towards on the pedal. And second thing is, rather than having it rigid, why would not to have it more rotatable? Why not to have it more fringy and more feeble? So yes, biomechanical assessment is very important when talking about a sports specific equipment, when you're designing a sports specific equipment.
Okay, another question. Suppose a player feels that his form is off. The way he's performing is not his best, and he's also injury free. Maybe actually not suffering of any injury. Does biomechanics help in any way, or can that be a turning point? Like if maybe stagnancy in performance also for that matter. Can biomechanical analysis have any effect, or any change could be made to his training regime?
See, we should not be blindly focused on only one parameter when we are talking about the athlete. Biomechanical itself is a very important factor. But when the athlete is saying that he is himself fine, and we actually supposedly his biomechanical assessment is also perfect, so we should not just neglect the fact there are certain other factors that is also responsible, whether his nutrition is fine or not, whether it's giving more time to the recovery or not, whether it's giving more time to the sleep or not. So yes, biomechanical assessment can be done if the athlete himself even feeling that is fine or not. But when he get injured on the field, so that is an important factor when we just talking about the biomechanics. Yes, we have to go through that.
Nilesh, do you have any other question, or can I ask the next one?
The last question from my side. How can a biomechanics prevent sports injuries?
See, biomechanics will prevent sports injuries because the most important thing is the gait analysis or the motion analysis that we are basically See, there is a certain, it has actually been done in a gait analysis center where in a force platform, the athlete, whoever belongs to any specific sports, the transducers that has been applied, and we basically see the recruitment and the firing pattern of a particular muscle. So we can have a thorough idea that how that muscle will be going to respond on that particular sport. Based on that only, we can just we can give a prehab or a rehab protocol to the concerned athlete based on his sports and based on his muscle recruitment and the pattern that we just got obtained through the biomechanical testing or the analysis.
Yeah, thank you.
One of our participants would just like to ask you a question. Just a second.
Hello, ma'am, doctor. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Only question I have is in terms of biomechanics. I'm a specialized in biomechanics. So in a team, we have sports nutritionist, we have coach, we have strength and conditioning expert. So my question is, how important will be an addition of a sports biomechanist in the team of training for a sports person?
See, the whole
is my question
lecture was about the biomechanics as well. So yes, from the lecture, it has been very clear that there is a very important need of a biomechanics because it all works in harmony and sync. See, I'm being a sports medicine physician. If I'll be working with a team, I would like to incorporate a biomechanic in my team. I would like to have the that biomechanical assessment of every of my athletes because he will be the best person. You know, he can have that rapport with the coaches, with the nutritionists, with the psychologists, and yes, we can all work together and go ahead with an athlete because as I had already discussed in the entire PPT that the role of biomechanics is very important. Talking about the injury, talking about the performance, talking about giving a sport-specific rehab to a particular athlete. So the need for the biomechanics is an important when talking about.
Okay, the last question for today is, can you guide us on if someone wants to make a career in biomechanics or sports biomechanics? What are the, maybe the study required or what are the career prospects in this field?
See, if they want to go for it, then I think there are various career options that has been available online for the biomechanics as well. If they would like to have something from, they would like to know something from me, then I have my mail written on the last slide. They can anytime mail me. I can just guide them through the content, whatever I have got related to the biomechanics, I can give light to them. Sorry, you're not audible. I can't
it was a wonderful, I'm sorry, it was a wonderful, yeah, it was a wonderful session. Thank you so much. And to propose the vote of thanks, I call on our coach, football coach from our department, Selvin Fernandez, to propose the vote of thanks. Selvin, you can propose the vote of thanks now.
Good evening. Respected officials, resource person, and participants of today's program. We came to the end of today's program. As the saying goes, it is not the will to win that matters. Everyone has that. It is the will to prepare to win that matters. We are on the right path, preparing and educating ourselves to learn, win, and achieve. With these words, on behalf of the coaching section of the Sports Authority of Goa and Indian Society of Exercise and Sports Medicine, I take this opportunity to thank all those who have worked towards making today's program on biomechanics in sports a big success. I would especially like to thank our resource person, Dr. Shika Dondial, for accepting our invite to conduct today's program and sharing valuable knowledge on sports biomechanics. We are thankful to our Executive Director, Shri V.M. Prabhudesai, and Director of Coaching, Shri Bruno Coutinho, for their continuous support and encouragement in all the activities conducted. A special thanks to all the officials, members of the Indian Society of Sports and Exercise Medicine, especially Dr. Siddharth and Dr. Aditya, for all the support provided. I wish to thank our technical support team and to all the participants who attended today's webinar. Thank you once again. Lastly, filling of the feedback form provided is compulsory for certificates to be issued. Please click on the link provided in chat box on Zoom and YouTube. Fill and submit it within 30 minutes of the program. Your certificates will be sent to you upon verification of records in 10 days. This is Selvin Fernandez, football coach, signing off for today. Thank you and have a great evening ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Shikha. Thank you.